Jake Martinez felt his stomach drop as the shuttle began to shake violently. Red warning lights flashed across the control panel, and the computer voice kept repeating the same message over and over. Engine failure. Emergency landing required. He gripped the controls tight and tried to keep the small craft steady. Jake was a good engineer, but he was not the best pilot. The shuttle was falling fast toward the planet below. Through the front window he could see a world covered in strange purple forests and what looked like cities made of crystal. "Come on, hold together," Jake whispered to his machine. He had been doing a simple job, checking some equipment on a nearby moon. It should have been easy. Now he was crashing on a planet that was not supposed to have any life on it. The shuttle hit the ground hard. Jake's head knocked against something and everything went black. When Jake woke up, his head hurt badly. Smoke was coming from the broken control panel. He could taste blood in his mouth. Slowly he checked his body. His left arm was sore, but nothing seemed broken. He was lucky to be alive. Jake looked outside through the cracked window. The shuttle had crashed in a clearing surrounded by tall trees with silver leaves. The trees made soft musical sounds when the wind blew through them. In the distance, he could see tall buildings that looked like they were made of colored glass. He grabbed his emergency pack and climbed out of the ruined shuttle. The air smelled sweet, like flowers. It was warm, but not too hot. Jake could breathe without any problems. That was good news. Jake tried to call his ship the Destiny on his radio. Nothing but static came through the speaker. The crash had broken most of his communication equipment. He was alone on an alien world with no way to call for help. For the next few hours, Jake worked on trying to fix his radio. He was good with machines, and he had some spare parts in his emergency kit. But the damage was too bad. He would need parts that he did not have. As the sun began to set, Jake heard something moving in the forest. He grabbed his small emergency weapon and hid behind the shuttle. The sounds got closer. It was not just one creature. It sounded like many of them moving together. The beings that came out of the forest were like nothing Jake had ever seen. They were tall, maybe 7 feet high, with smooth skin that changed colors like oil on water. Their arms were long and thin, ending in hands that had 6 fingers each. The fingers were very long and moved in strange, graceful ways. The aliens wore clothes that looked like they were made from the same material as their crystal cities. The cloth seemed to glow with its own light. Some of them carried weapons that looked like long sticks made of blue crystal. Jake raised his hands above his head to show he was not dangerous. "Hello," he called out. "I am friendly. I do not want to fight." The aliens stopped and looked at each other. They began to make sounds that were like music mixed with words. Their voices went up and down like they were singing. At the same time, their long fingers moved quickly in the air, making shapes and patterns that Jake could not understand. One of the aliens, who seemed to be their leader, stepped forward. This one had golden lines running through its skin that pulsed with light. It pointed at Jake and made more musical sounds. Its fingers danced in the air. Jake tried to copy one of the finger movements he had seen. The aliens all stopped talking at once. They looked surprised. The leader made a different sound and walked closer to Jake. Jake realized that these beings were trying to communicate with him, but their language was completely different from anything humans used. The musical sounds were too complex for him to copy, and the finger movements seemed to be part of their language too. The leader alien pointed at Jake's weapon. Jake slowly put the small gun on the ground and kicked it away. He pointed at himself and said, "Jake, my name is Jake." Then he pointed at the alien and waited. The alien made a long musical phrase and moved its fingers in a flowing pattern. Jake tried to copy the finger movement, but his human hands were clumsy compared to the alien's graceful motions. More aliens came out of the forest. Jake counted at least 20 of them. They formed a circle around him, but they did not seem angry or scared. They seemed curious about this strange new creature they had found. The leader made a decision. It gestured for Jake to follow them. Some of the other aliens picked up pieces of his broken shuttle to examine them. Jake grabbed his emergency pack and walked with them into the forest. As they traveled, Jake tried to learn more about these beings. They moved through the forest like they had walked these paths many times before. The crystal weapons they carried gave off a soft blue light that helped them see in the growing darkness. After walking for what felt like hours, they came to the edge of the forest. Jake gasped at what he saw. The crystal city was even more amazing up close. The buildings were tall and twisted like frozen music. Light moved through them in patterns that changed colors constantly. The aliens led Jake through streets paved with smooth stone that felt warm under his feet. Other aliens stopped to stare at him as they passed. Some made musical sounds that Jake thought might be laughter. Finally, they reached the largest building in the center of the city. It was shaped like a huge crystal flower, with petals that reached high into the sky. Guards at the entrance wore more elaborate clothes and carried larger weapons. The leader of Jake's group spoke to the guards with complex music and finger movements. After a long discussion, the guards stepped aside. Jake was led into the Crystal Palace, wondering what would happen to him next. Inside, the walls glowed with soft light. The ceiling was so high that Jake could barely see it. Other aliens moved through the halls, all making their musical language and moving their fingers in their strange, beautiful way. Jake Martinez, engineer from Earth, was about to meet an alien princess who would change both their worlds forever. The throne room was the most beautiful place Jake had ever seen. The walls were made of crystal that showed moving pictures of stars and planets. The floor felt like walking on clouds, but it was solid under his feet. Tall pillars reached up to the ceiling, and each one sang with a different musical note. At the far end of the room sat the alien emperor on a throne that looked like it was carved from a single giant diamond. He was older than the other aliens Jake had seen, with skin that had turned more silver than the rainbow colors of the younger ones. Golden lines covered his body like a map of lightning. Next to the emperor stood a female alien who made Jake stop and stare. She was tall and graceful like the others, but her skin sparkled with tiny lights that looked like stars. Her clothes were made from cloth that moved like water and changed colors as she breathed. Her long fingers were decorated with rings that glowed softly. This had to be the princess. The leader of the group that had found Jake stepped forward and began speaking to the emperor. The musical language filled the room, and Jake watched as many fingers moved in complex patterns. He could tell they were talking about him, but he could not understand any of it. The emperor looked at Jake for a long time. His expression was hard to read, but Jake thought he saw curiosity mixed with concern. Finally, the emperor made a short musical phrase that sounded like a question. The princess stepped closer to Jake. When she spoke, her voice was like silver bells ringing. Her fingers moved in slow, careful patterns as if she was trying to make Jake understand something important. Jake pointed to himself and said clearly, "Jake." Then he pointed to her and waited. The princess looked surprised. She made a musical sound that might have been laughter. Then she pointed to herself and sang a beautiful sequence of notes while her fingers danced in the air. The song was too complex for Jake to remember, but he tried anyway. "Kira," he said, picking out what sounded like the main part of her name. The princess smiled, and Jake felt his heart skip a beat. Her smile was warm and friendly, nothing like what he had expected from an alien being. She nodded and pointed to herself again, making a shorter musical phrase. This time Jake heard something that sounded like Kirith. "Kirith," Jake repeated, and her smile got even bigger. The emperor and princess talked for a long time in their musical language. Jake could not understand the words, but he could tell from their gestures and tones that they were having some kind of argument. The emperor sounded firm and worried. The princess sounded like she was asking for something. Finally, the princess won. The emperor made a sound that seemed like agreement, though he did not look happy about it. He gestured to some guards who approached Jake carefully. Jake tensed up, ready to defend himself, but Princess Kirith quickly moved between him and the guards. She made calming gestures with her hands and spoke to Jake in a gentle tone, even though he could not understand her words. The guards led Jake out of the throne room, but not like a prisoner. Kirith walked beside him, continuing to make soft musical sounds that Jake thought were meant to comfort him. They went through many halls filled with amazing art and decorations until they reached a smaller room. The room was clearly meant for guests. It had a bed that looked comfortable, a table, and a window that showed the city outside. There was even a small bathroom area, though the fixtures were designed for aliens with longer fingers than humans had. Kirith showed Jake around the room, pointing to different things and saying their names in her musical language. She pointed to the bed and made soft, sleepy sounds. She pointed to a container of water and made drinking motions. Jake began to understand that she was trying to teach him basic words. "Water," Jake said, pointing to the container. Then he tried to copy the musical sound Kirith had made. His attempt was clumsy, but she nodded encouragingly. Kirith spent the next hour showing Jake different objects and trying to teach him their names. Jake learned that the musical part of their language was very hard for him to copy. His human voice could not make the right sounds, but he noticed that Kirith also used her fingers a lot when she spoke, and those movements he might be able to learn. When it got dark outside, Kirith made goodbye gestures and left Jake alone in the room. Jake sat on the bed and thought about his situation. He was stranded on an alien planet, but at least these beings seemed friendly. The princess especially seemed interested in helping him. The next morning, Kirith returned with food. The meal looked strange, but it smelled good. She showed Jake how to eat it, and he found that it tasted like sweet fruit mixed with something nutty. His stomach had been empty for a long time, so he ate gratefully. After breakfast, Kirith began what Jake realized was a language lesson. She started with simple things, pointing to herself, to Jake, to objects in the room. But this time she focused more on the finger movements than on the musical sounds. Jake watched carefully as her long, graceful fingers made different shapes and patterns. When she pointed to water, her fingers made a flowing motion like a stream. When she pointed to food, her fingers made a different pattern that looked like something growing. "Show me again," Jake said, even though he knew she could not understand his words. He pointed to the water and then to her hands. Kirith understood what he wanted. She repeated the finger pattern for water, doing it slowly so Jake could see each movement. Jake tried to copy it with his shorter, clumsier human fingers. His attempt was not very good, but Kirith clapped her hands together in what seemed like approval. For the next several days, Kirith visited Jake every morning and afternoon. They worked together on building a way to communicate using finger patterns. Jake learned that different movements meant different things. Up and down motions seemed to be about direction or time. Side-to-side movements were about size or amount. Circular motions were about concepts like completion or wholeness. Jake was good at seeing patterns. It was part of what made him a good engineer. He began to understand the rules behind the finger language faster than Kirith had expected. Soon he could ask for water, food, and rest using the correct finger movements. But Jake also noticed something interesting. While Kirith was teaching him her language, she was also learning about him. She watched how he used his hands to fix things in his room when they broke. She seemed fascinated by how he thought about problems. One day, Jake was trying to fix a light that had stopped working. The alien technology was completely different from anything he knew, but he could see that there was a loose connection somewhere. He used his small toolkit to carefully take apart the light fixture. Kirith watched with great interest as Jake found the problem and fixed it. When the light came back on, she made excited musical sounds and rapid finger movements that Jake thought meant something like amazing or wonderful. Jake realized that while he was learning about alien technology, Kirith was learning about human problem-solving methods. She had never seen anyone approach a technical problem the way he did. Her people seemed to use their advanced crystal technology, but they might not think about simple mechanical solutions the way humans did. This gave Jake an idea. Maybe he could offer something valuable to these people in exchange for their help. He might be stranded on their planet, but he was not helpless. He had knowledge and skills that could be useful to them. The next time Kirith visited, Jake tried to communicate this idea to her using their developing finger language. It was hard to express complex thoughts with simple gestures, but he could see that she was beginning to understand what he meant. Kirith looked thoughtful for a long time. Then she made a series of finger movements that Jake had not seen before. She repeated them several times, and Jake realized she was asking him a question, something like, "Can you help us?" Jake nodded and made the finger sign for yes that she had taught him. He pointed to himself, then made gestures that he hoped meant, "I want to help." For the first time since he had crashed on this world, Jake felt hope. He was beginning to communicate with Princess Kirith, and she seemed to think he might be able to help her people in some way. Maybe being stranded here would not be so bad after all. 3 weeks had passed since Jake's crash landing, and his daily lessons with Princess Kirith had become the best part of his day. They had developed their own special way of talking that mixed her finger language with simple drawings and gestures that Jake invented. Jake had learned to make over 100 different finger signs. He could ask for things he needed, tell Kirith about his feelings, and even share simple ideas about his home world. Kirith had learned some basic human gestures too, like nodding for yes and shaking her head for no. But the real breakthrough came when Jake introduced her to writing. Look, Jake said one morning, picking up a stick to draw in the dirt floor of the palace garden where they usually met. He drew a simple picture of the sun and then made the finger sign for light that Kirith had taught him. Kirith stared at the drawing with wide eyes. She had never seen anyone make pictures to represent ideas before. Her people's advanced technology used crystal patterns and musical tones for everything, but they had never developed simple writing. Jake drew more pictures, a circle for the moon, wavy lines for water, a stick figure for a person. Each time he matched the drawing with the finger signs Kirith had taught him. Soon she was drawing too, her long fingers creating beautiful, flowing pictures that were much more artistic than Jake's simple sketches. "This changes everything," Kirith said in her musical language, though Jake could only understand the excitement in her voice. She made rapid finger movements that he had learned meant new and important and wonderful. That afternoon, Kirith brought Jake to a different part of the palace. This room was filled with alien scholars and scientists, all working with crystal devices that glowed and hummed with energy. When Kirith introduced Jake and showed them the drawing method he had taught her, they were amazed. One old scholar with silver skin and very long fingers tried drawing for himself. His first attempts were shaky, but soon he was creating complex diagrams. He showed Jake a crystal device and then drew a picture of how it worked. Jake could see that it was some kind of energy collector, but the design seemed overly complicated. Jake took the stick and drew his own version of the device. He simplified it, showing how the same job could be done with fewer parts and less complexity. The scholars gathered around to look at his drawing, making excited musical sounds. The old scholar asked Kirith something in their language. She turned to Jake and used their finger signs to ask, "How do you think this way?" Jake thought for a moment, then drew two pictures side by side. One showed a complex maze with many twists and turns. The other showed a straight line from start to finish. He pointed to the straight line and made the finger sign for better. This started a long discussion among the scholars. Jake could not understand their words, but he could tell they were talking about different ways of solving problems. Some seemed excited by his ideas, while others looked doubtful. Over the next few days, Jake learned more about the Zilani civilization. They had incredible technology based on living crystals that could store and channel energy. Their cities were powered by massive crystal networks that had run perfectly for thousands of years. But something was going wrong. Kirith brought Jake to the top of the palace tower one evening as the sun was setting. From there, he could see the whole crystal city spread out below them. It should have been beautiful, with all the buildings glowing with soft light. Instead, Jake noticed that many areas were darker than they should be. "The crystals are failing," Kirith told him through their finger language and drawings in the sand. She drew pictures showing how the energy flowed through the city, but many of the lines were broken or weak. Jake studied her drawings carefully. The crystal network was incredibly complex, with energy flowing through thousands of connections. It was an amazing system, but Jake could see the problem immediately. There were no backup systems. If any part of the network failed, it affected everything else. "Where does the energy come from?" Jake asked, using their sign language. Kirith led him to another part of the tower and pointed to a massive crystal formation in the center of the city. It was huge, maybe 100 feet tall, and it pulsed with bright energy. But even Jake could see that the pulses were getting weaker and less regular. "The heart crystal is dying," Kirith explained through pictures and gestures. "Our best minds have tried everything, but we cannot fix it. Soon our whole city will go dark." Jake looked at the failing crystal and then at Kirith's worried face. Her people were facing a crisis that could destroy their civilization, and their most advanced scientist could not solve it. But Jake had an idea. He spent the next hour drawing diagrams in the sand, showing Kirith his thoughts. The Zilani had built their entire energy system like a single giant machine. When one part broke, everything stopped working. But humans had learned to build systems with multiple backups and alternative pathways. "What if we don't fix the heart crystal?" Jake drew and signed. "What if we build a new system that doesn't need it?" Kirith looked confused at first. Her people had always depended on their great crystals. The idea of building something completely different was hard for her to imagine. Jake drew more pictures, showing how mechanical systems could work alongside crystal technology. He showed her ideas about generators, batteries, and power distribution networks. Simple human technology that could support the Zilani's advanced crystal systems. "Your crystals are beautiful and powerful," Jake explained through drawings and gestures. But they need help. Human machines can be that help. Kirith studied Jake's drawings for a long time. Slowly, her expression changed from confusion to understanding to excitement. She began making rapid finger movements that Jake had learned meant, yes, possible, brilliant. But then her expression became worried again. She drew a picture of the Emperor and other important Zilani, then made gestures that Jake understood to mean, they will not believe, and too different. Jake understood the problem. He was asking the Zilani to trust technology from a primitive alien species. Their own scientists had failed to solve the crisis, so why should they listen to a crashed pilot from a world they had never heard of? Then we must prove it works, Jake signed and drew. We build a small test first. That night Jake could not sleep. He lay in his bed thinking about the problem facing Kirith's people. He had seen many different kinds of engineering challenges in his career, but this was the biggest one yet. An entire civilization was depending on technology that was failing, and he might be their only hope. But Jake also realized something else. Working with Kirith over the past weeks had taught him things about crystal technology that no human had ever known. If he could combine his knowledge of mechanical systems with her understanding of crystal energy, they might create something completely new, something better than either of their peoples had built alone. The next morning, Jake was ready with a plan. When Kirith arrived for their daily lesson, he had already prepared detailed drawings showing exactly how they could build a test system. We start small, he explained, through their combined language of signs, pictures, and gestures. One building, one crystal, one backup system. If it works, we show your father. If it fails, we try again. Kirith looked at his drawings and nodded slowly. She understood that this was more than just fixing a technical problem. This was about proving that two very different species could work together to create something neither could build alone. When do we start? She asked through finger signs. Jake smiled and made the sign for now. Princess Kirith smiled back, and Jake knew that they were about to begin the most important engineering project of his life. The fate of an entire alien civilization might depend on whether a human engineer and an alien princess could turn their strange friendship into a working solution. The next morning brought bad news. Princess Kirith arrived at Jake's room with her usually bright skin looking dim and worried. She made urgent finger signs that Jake had learned meant trouble and danger. Through their communication system of drawings and gestures, Kirith explained what had happened. General Mordek, the Emperor's military advisor, had convinced many of the council members that Jake was dangerous. The general believed that humans were primitive beings who could not be trusted with Zilani secrets. He says you are a spy, Kirith drew in the sand. He thinks you are here to steal our crystal technology and bring armies to conquer us. Jake felt frustrated and scared. He had been trying to help these people, and now some of them wanted to get rid of him. What does your father think? He asked through finger signs. He is not sure, Kirith replied. General Mordek wants to send you away from our world. Some council members agree with him. Others want to study you more. Father must decide soon. Jake realized that his time was running out. If he was going to prove that he could help the Zilani, he had to do it quickly. How long do we have? He asked. Kirith held up her fingers in a pattern that Jake had learned meant 3 days. The council would meet in 3 days to decide his fate. Then we must build our test system now. Jake signed with determination. We must show them that human and Zilani technology can work together. But Kirith shook her head sadly. General Mordek has forbidden it. He says you cannot touch any of our crystal technology. He has posted guards to watch you. Jake felt his hope fading, but then he had an idea. What if we don't use the palace crystals? What if we use broken ones that no one wants? Kirith's skin began to brighten as she understood his plan. There was a place outside the city where old, damaged crystals were taken when they stopped working. The Zilani usually ignored these crystal graveyards because they thought the broken crystals were useless. That night, Jake and Kirith snuck out of the palace. She led him through dark streets to the edge of the city, where huge piles of dim, cracked crystals lay abandoned. To the Zilani, these were just garbage. To Jake, they were exactly what he needed. These are not completely dead, Jake explained as he examined the broken crystals. They still have some energy, but it cannot flow properly because of the damage. If we can bypass the broken parts. Working by moonlight, Jake and Kirith began building their test system. Jake used parts from his emergency kit and pieces of metal from his crashed shuttle to create simple mechanical devices. Kirith used her knowledge of crystal technology to connect the broken crystals in new ways. The work was difficult. Jake's human hands were clumsy compared to Kirith's long, graceful fingers. He had to tell her exactly how to make each connection while she acted as his hands for the delicate crystal work. "Turn the blue crystal 1/4 to the left," Jake would say through finger signs. "Now connect the silver wire to the third energy point." Kirith followed his instructions perfectly, even when the procedures seemed strange to her. She was learning to think like a human engineer, while Jake was learning to work with living crystal technology. By dawn, they had built something that had never existed before, a hybrid system that combined human mechanical engineering with Zilani crystal technology. It was small and rough-looking, but Jake thought it might work. The test moment, Jake signed to Kirith. They both held their breath as he activated the system. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the broken crystals began to glow with steady, warm light. The mechanical parts hummed quietly as they regulated the energy flow. The hybrid system was working perfectly. Kirith made excited musical sounds and rapid finger movements that Jake understood to mean something like incredible and impossible and wonderful all at once, but their celebration was cut short. General Mordek appeared with a group of guards drawn by the light from their test system. The general was a tall, imposing Zilani with dark skin marked by red lines that pulsed with anger. When he saw what Jake and Kirith had built, his musical voice became harsh and threatening. "You have disobeyed the council's orders," he said to Kirith in their language. Though Jake could not understand the words, the meaning was clear from the general's tone and aggressive gestures. Kirith stood protectively in front of Jake and replied to the general with firm, musical phrases. Jake could tell she was defending him and their work. The argument continued for several minutes, with more guards arriving to see what was happening. Finally, General Mordek made a sharp command, and the guards moved toward Jake. But Kirith stepped between them again. She made a long speech in her musical language, pointing to their working test system and making emphatic gestures. Jake heard her say words that sounded like proof and help and father. General Mordek looked at the glowing hybrid system with obvious distrust. But even he could see that it was working. Broken crystals that had been dead for years were now producing steady light and energy. After a long pause, the general made a decision. He spoke to Kirith with what sounded like reluctant agreement. Then he and his guards left, but Jake could tell this was not over. "What did you tell him?" Jake asked through finger signs. "I told him he must bring father here to see what we have built," Kirith replied. "I told him that if our system can make dead crystals work again, maybe it can save the heart crystal too." Within an hour, Emperor Veltar arrived with most of the royal council. General Mordek was there too, along with the old scholars Jake had met before. Everyone looked skeptical except for Kirith. Jake felt nervous as all these important aliens examined his work. The hybrid system looked crude compared to their elegant crystal technology. But it was working, and that was what mattered. Emperor Veltar studied the glowing crystals for a long time. Then he asked Kirith questions in their musical language. She answered by drawing diagrams in the sand and making finger signs that explained how the system worked. The old scholars became very excited when they understood what Jake had done. They began talking rapidly among themselves, making complex finger patterns as they discussed the implications. But General Mordek remained suspicious. He made angry musical sounds and pointed at Jake while speaking to the Emperor. Jake could guess what he was saying, that this alien could not be trusted, that this might be some kind of trick. Emperor Veltar listened to everyone, then made a decision. He spoke directly to Jake, though Jake could not understand the words. Kirith quickly translated through their sign language. "Father says your small test is interesting, but not enough. If you want to prove you can really help us, you must do something bigger. You must fix the heart crystal itself." Jake felt his stomach drop. The heart crystal was huge and incredibly complex. If he made a mistake, he could destroy the power source for the entire city. Thousands of Zilani would suffer in darkness, but he also knew this was his only chance. If he refused the challenge, General Mordek would certainly convince the council to send him away. If he tried and failed, the result would be the same. "I will do it," Jake signed to Kirith, "but I will need your help. I cannot touch the crystals safely with my human hands. You must be my hands for this work." Kirith looked scared, but she nodded bravely. "We will do it together," she signed back. Emperor Veltar made an announcement to the assembled council. Jake could not understand the words, but he could tell from everyone's reactions that the challenge was now official. He had 3 days to fix the heart crystal, or leave the planet forever. As the crowd began to leave, Jake looked at the massive heart crystal glowing weakly in the distance. It was the biggest engineering challenge of his life, and the stakes could not be higher, but he was not facing it alone. Princess Kirith stood beside him, ready to bridge the gap between their two very different ways of understanding the world. Together, they would either save a civilization or fail trying. The heart crystal was even more magnificent up close than Jake had imagined. It stood in the center of a huge chamber deep beneath the palace, surrounded by smaller crystals that formed complex patterns on the walls. The air hummed with energy, but Jake could see that the great crystal's light was fading. Kirith led him around the chamber, showing him how the crystal network was supposed to work. Energy flowed from the heart crystal through thousands of tiny connections to power the entire city. But many of those connections were failing, and the heart crystal itself was becoming unstable. "It is like a heart that is too tired," Kirith explained through their finger language. "It has worked for 3,000 years without rest. Now it needs help, but we do not know how to give it." Jake spent hours studying the crystal and the energy patterns that flowed through it. He made detailed drawings of everything he saw, trying to understand how this incredible technology worked. Slowly, he began to see the problem. "Your crystal is not dying," he told Kirith through signs and drawings. "It is being asked to do too much work, like a person trying to carry a weight that is too heavy." The Zilani had built their entire energy system to depend on one massive crystal. Over 3,000 years, the city had grown larger and larger, demanding more and more power. The heart crystal was simply overloaded. "We need to give it help," Jake continued. "Not replace it, but support it, like friends helping someone carry a heavy load." Jake's plan was ambitious but simple. Instead of trying to fix the heart crystal directly, they would build a network of smaller hybrid systems around it. These would use Jake's mechanical technology combined with Zilani crystals to take some of the load off the main crystal. But the work would be incredibly difficult. They had to install the new systems without shutting down the power to the city. One mistake could cause a complete failure that would leave thousands of Zilani in darkness. Kirith gathered a team of the most skilled crystal workers in the city. At first, many of them were suspicious of working with human technology. But when Kirith showed them the test system that Jake had built from broken crystals, they became more interested. Jake could not communicate directly with the Zilani workers, so Kirith became his translator. She learned to understand his engineering concepts and then explain them to her people using their musical language and finger signs. "The human thinks differently than we do," she told them. "He sees ways to solve problems that we have never considered, but his ideas work." The work began at dawn the next day. Jake designed each part of the hybrid system, drawing detailed plans that showed exactly how every piece should be connected. Then Kirith and her team built each component using their superior skill with crystal technology. It was like a complex dance. Jake would point to a place where a connection needed to be made, and Kirith would guide one of her workers to make it perfectly. When a crystal needed to be adjusted by tiny amounts, Kirith's long, delicate fingers could make changes that Jake's clumsy human hands never could. By the end of the first day, they had installed 3 small hybrid units around the heart crystal. Jake activated them one at a time, watching carefully as they began to share the energy load. The heart crystal's pulsing became a little stronger and more regular. Word of their progress spread through the city. Emperor Veltar came to check on their work, along with many council members. Even General Mordek watched from a distance, though he still looked suspicious. "It is working," one of the old scholars said in amazement, watching the displays that showed energy flowing through the new hybrid systems. The heart crystal is already more stable than it has been in months, but Jake knew they were not finished yet. The 3 small units were helping, but they needed at least 6 more to truly solve the problem. And they had less than 2 days left before the council's deadline. On the second day, something went wrong. One of the hybrid units began to overheat, and sparks started flying from the mechanical components. The Zilani workers stepped back in alarm, afraid that the whole system might explode, but Jake was not afraid. This was the kind of problem he understood. He quickly shut down the overheating unit and began taking it apart to find the cause. "Loose connection here," he explained to Kira through finger signs. "Too much resistance creates heat. Easy to fix." Kirith watched as Jake repaired the mechanical problem with calm confidence. She realized that while her people were masters of crystal technology, Jake had a deep understanding of how machines worked and how to fix them when they broke. "We need both kinds of knowledge," she told her team. "Crystals and machines together are stronger than either one alone." The repair took only an hour, and soon the hybrid unit was working perfectly again. The Zilani workers began to understand that Jake's mechanical systems were not primitive, they were just different. And when combined with crystal technology, they created something new and powerful. By the end of the second day, they had installed 6 hybrid units and the heart crystal was glowing more brightly than it had in years. The energy displays showed that the load was now properly distributed, with plenty of backup capacity for the growing city. On the morning of the third day, Emperor Veltar called for a full test. All the hybrid units were activated at once, and the heart crystal's energy output was measured. The results were incredible. Not only was the crystal stable, but the entire system was now producing more power than the city had ever had before. General Mordek could no longer deny the success of Jake's solution. The hybrid technology had saved their civilization and made it stronger than ever. When the Emperor asked for the Council's decision about Jake's fate, even the general voted to let him stay. But the Emperor had a bigger question. "Can you teach our people how to build more of these hybrid systems?" Kirith translated for Jake. Jake nodded eagerly. This was exactly what he had hoped for, a chance to share knowledge between their two species. Over the following weeks, Jake worked with Kirith to create a school where humans and Zilani could learn from each other. They developed better ways to communicate between the species, building on the finger language and drawing systems they had invented. When rescue ships from Earth finally arrived, they found something amazing. Jake was not just alive. He had become the first human ambassador to an alien civilization. The Zilani had agreed to share their crystal technology with humanity in exchange for human mechanical knowledge. Jake faced a difficult choice. He could return to Earth as a hero, or he could stay on Zilani Prime to continue building the bridge. Between their worlds, the decision became easier when Princess Kirith asked him to stay. "We have built something together that neither of our peoples could build alone," she told him, "through their special communication system. But this is just the beginning. There is so much more we can learn from each other." Jake agreed to stay as Earth's first ambassador to the Zilani Empire. He sent messages back to Earth describing everything he had learned and inviting human engineers to come and study hybrid technology. Months later, Jake stood in the Great Crystal Chamber watching human and Zilani students working together on new projects. They were building incredible devices that combined the best of both technologies: crystal computers that could think like human minds, and mechanical systems that could grow and adapt like living crystals. Kirith stood beside him, both of them using the finger language they had developed to teach a class of mixed human and Zilani students. The language barrier that had once seemed impossible to cross was now just a small step in the learning process. "Do you ever regret crashing on our world?" Kirith asked him through their special signs. Jake looked around at the amazing things they had built together, the hybrid technology that had saved a civilization, the school that was teaching two species to work as one, and the friendship that had started it all. "Best crash landing ever," he signed back with a smile. In the distance, the heart crystal pulsed with strong, steady light, surrounded by the hybrid systems that would keep it healthy for thousands of years to come. It was a symbol of what could happen when two very different ways of thinking learned to work together. Jake Martinez had come to this world as a lost engineer. He was staying as a bridge between two civilizations, helping to build a future that would be brighter than anything either species could have achieved alone. And it all started because an alien princess had been patient enough to show him the meaning of her words with her fingers. The universe was a much smaller place than it used to be, and it was getting smaller every day as humans and Zilani learned to understand each other. Jake could hardly wait to see what they would build together next.